Well, hello sports fans, and welcome to Harry's Stuff and Such. This will be part 3 of my Voron 2.4 build log, where I will be installing the Z drives as well as the Z idlers. So sit back, grab you a cup of coffee, and enjoy. Before assembling the Z drive units, there is some prep work to perform. That prep work is the installation of heat set inserts into the Z drive printed parts as shown here. So for the prep work, you're going to need these 3mm brass heat inserts, and you'll need the Z drive housings, the main housing and the retaining part of the housing. You have 2 inserts that go into the main housing. In these 2 locations, you'll notice the 2 larger holes here. Also in the retaining part of the housing, on the back side you have 6 inserts to go here, and then you have 1 insert here for a total of 7. So on my soldering iron I have a heat insert tip so that I can easily place the tip onto the heat insert and press it squarely into the holes on the printed part. Now you don't have to have one of these items. You could use your soldering iron. Now if you're using a soldering iron tip, you need to be careful in that your soldering iron tip doesn't go below the bottom of your heat insert, because that will damage the hole in which the heat insert goes into. The other problem is that sometimes your heat insert will become stuck onto the conical part of your tip, and when you go to withdraw your tip, it'll pull the heat insert out of the plastic. So I'm placing the heat insert into the hole that it is supposed to be pressed into, and I've heated my soldering iron up to 230 degrees Celsius. Now squarely and place the heat insert tip or your soldering iron into the heat insert and press squarely and keep it as vertical as possible. And there you have it. Heat insert is installed. It's below the surface, just barely below the surface, as it should be. With the brass heat inserts now installed in both printed parts of the belt drive housing, it's now time to move on to the next part of the assembly, which is the belt drive assembly, shown here. For the first part of the belt drive assembly, you'll need the GT2 20-tooth 9mm wide pulley and the 2 grub screws that come with it. We also need one of the 5x60mm D shafts, as well as a 2mm nut driver. Also, it would be good to use a little blue Loctite. Now the first thing you need to do is to take your pulley, slide it onto the shaft, and make sure that there's 33 millimeters of clearance from the bottom of the shaft to the bottom of the pulley. I printed a little jig here in order to make sure that I got that, and that makes it easy for me just to slide the pulley in, down to, and it's 33 millimeters, and then I just tighten the grub screws. It's a good idea to make sure that the grub screw, one of the grub screw, is on the flat part of the shaft. It's always a good idea to use a little bit of Loctite. I'm using the blue Loctite. And I'm just going to start the grub screw into the hole. Make sure that I'm aligned with the flat part of the shaft. Then I'll use my jig to get the 33 millimeters. and then I will tighten the grub screw to secure the first grub screw, because you have two. Then I'll add some Loctite to the second grub screw. After securing the grub screws, I'll remove any excess Loctite and check one last time to make sure I'm still at 33 millimeters. Now repeat this process for the other three pulleys and shaft. For the second part of the belt drive assembly, you'll need the 80-tooth pulley and its two grub screws. You'll need 3 of the 625 bearings. You'll need 4 M5 shims. You'll need the pulley and shaft assembly from the previous step, as well as a 2.5 millimeter nut driver and our old friend blue Loctite. So I will start by applying a little Loctite to both grub screws and then partially installing them into the 80-tooth pulley. So take one of the 625 bearings, put on the end of the shaft at the end of the 20-tooth pulley. Take 2 shims and slide on the other side of the pulley down the shaft. Take one of the 625 bearings, slide it on the shaft, and then take the other 2 shims to place on the shaft. Then take the 80-tooth pulley in this direction and slide it onto the shaft. And the other 629 bearing goes against the 20-tooth pulley. Now be sure and tighten one of the grub screws on the 80-tooth pulley onto the D or flat part of the shaft. And that completes the belt drive assembly. Be sure that it looks in this manner. So you have one of the 629 bearings, you have your 80-tooth bearing pulley, you have your 80-tooth pulley, 2 shims, 625 bearing, 2 shims, 20-tooth pulley, and then the last of the 625 bearings. Now repeat for the other 3. To complete the Z-drive, you'll now need the belt drive assembly that you completed. You'll need a 188 millimeter belt loop, the Z-drive housing, the main and the retaining, and you'll need 6 M3 by 40 socket head screws, as well as a 2.5 millimeter nut driver. So place the 188 millimeter belt over the 80-tooth pulley. Take the retaining housing. And turn it so that the small pulley is on this side and the belt loop goes through the larger of the two openings in the retainer. After you have installed the belt drive assembly onto the retaining part of the Z-drive housing, now it's time to install the main part of the housing. And this is where you'll be using the 6 3x40 millimeter socket head screws. To complete this assembly, you now need one more item, and that is the base plate. And so the items you need for that are, of course, the printed part base plate. You'll need an M5 nut, which goes on the bottom of the base plate. And then you'll need 3 M3x8 socket head screws. To install the base plate, you turn it over so that the M5 nut is on the bottom. Make sure that this slot is pointed toward these two large openings here, which will later accommodate M5 screws. Then install the base plate using the M3 screws. Now with the base plate installed on this assembly, it is now time to move on to the next part of the Z-drive assembly shown here. For this part of the assembly, you will need one of your NEMA 17 motors. You'll need a 16-tooth pulley as well as 2 grub screws. You'll need a motor mount and 3 M3x8 socket head screws to attach the motor mount to the NEMA 17 motor. In addition to these items, you'll also need a 2.5mm hex driver as well as the printed part jig in order to position the pulley properly on the shaft of the NEMA 17 motor. And you'll also need our old friend Loctite. So the first thing I will do is put a little Loctite on the grub screw and get it started in its proper location on the pulley, just enough to get it started. Now I'm going to slide the pulley on the shaft of the NEMA 17, aligning one of the grub screws with the flat part of the D shaft. And then I will be using the jig to properly position the pulley on the NEMA 17 shaft. You'll see on this jig there is a Z for the Z motors, and that's the part you want to use. So you will place it on the NEMA 17 motor, and that way you will align your pulley properly. And once you've got it properly aligned, it's time to tighten your grub screws. Now that the first set screw is tight, it's time to tighten the second. Now with the pulley properly installed on the shaft of the NEMA 17 motor, it's now time to add the motor mount. To install the motor mount, be sure that the long side of the motor mount is facing the plug of the NEMA 17 motor, like so. Now attach the motor mount to the NEMA 17 motor using the 3 M3x8 socket head screws. You'll attach using a 2.5 millimeter hex driver. Now, with the motor mount assembly complete, you only need to do this 3 more times. With all 4 of the Z-Drive units complete, it's now time to install them on the frame. And now it's time to install the last item, and that's the rubber foot. Now that the first Z-Drive unit is installed, I only have 3 more to go to complete the installation of the Z-Drives. Well, there you have it, sports fans. I've installed all 4 of the Z-Drives onto the frame of the Voron 2.4. Now I will be installing the Z-Idlers up next, but that will be in the next installment of this build log, because this one's taking a little longer than I intended. So if you liked this video, hey, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, give me a thumbs down. But anyways, just leave me a comment on what you liked or didn't like. And also, again, press that subscribe button, you guys. And I'll catch you on the backside.